The good old clap, take one.
That's right.
How many of you knew what you wanted to be when you were 7 years old? I did. I wanted to be world champion.
Hey, is there honesty involved in this podcast? Can we be honest?
You can shut your fucking lips.
And then I just said, put them up, what? Let's go.
He's like, you look too pretty on the wave. Get ugly.
We can talk about DMT if you want.
I thought we were boxing.
All right, we have Australia's Justin Gane on the lineup today. Ganey, thanks for coming on, man.
Mate, thanks for having us on, Dave. Look forward to it.
For sure. And, you know, it's strange times. You're in a home in Australia. I think you just moved into a new place. But how are things today? Where are you now? Who are you hanging out with?
Well, yeah, just moved into my house in a little township called Dungey, which is about 20 minutes kind of west of Cabarita Beach. So not far from the Gold Coast, up in the hinterland a bit, in the hills.
That sounds beautiful. So you're not right on the beach anymore, but have you been surfing? It looks like Australia's gotten plenty of swell lately.
I haven't. I never surfed that first swell, funny enough. I always just let the froth settle down. So I never surfed that first cyclone swell. Well, not on the points anyway.
Yeah.
It looked pretty good though. It had its moments. I think on the high tide up there, it looked pretty good. But it's a 6 to 8 foot again today.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I thought I'd start this conversation off with a short story that hopefully reflects probably what we're going to be talking about. But I worked at the Rip Curl Surf Center in San Clemente from 1998 to 2006, so high school, college, just after college. And for me, it was like an awesome place to work because these were the pre and early internet days. And for me, you know, the surf shop was this place where you got exposed to ideas and people and what was actually happening at the bleeding edge of surfing. And it's where I want to say it was maybe 2003, 2004. Our shop got exposed to Brenden, Margo, Margieson through your film Vonderjahr. Now, I had, and I'm sure the other shop crew had as well, like read about and heard about Margo before. And it was always, you know, people talking with a reverence and, you know, they're talking about his surfing and everything else. But Vonderjahr, from the poster we got to the film, blew us all away. It was the story and ability, and you know, maybe most importantly, you know, why those things mattered. Because you know, surfing is this sort of beautifully difficult to define activity, and because of that lack of definition, there's often a lack of consensus on what's quote unquote good surfing, or even what's important in surfing. But I found through that film and all of your other films, you seem to have at least kind of a center of gravity for your surfing world. And you kind of, for me anyway, and I might be overstating it or understating or just getting it completely wrong, but you always existed as this trans-Pacific herald telling the story of Australian surfing. Now, I know there are other filmmakers that did that too, but you really had a series of films that introduced me and my peers on the West Coast to what was happening in Australia, like well before the internet and social media and everything kind of came of age. Did you have any self-awareness of that was kind of the impact you were making over here at the time?
I didn't know that my films really got over there much at all until probably I did Margo's film Vonderjahr. I never really broke into America much, so I didn't really know what was going on over there. But Taylor Steele helped me distribute the film over there. So yeah, that was probably the first film that really broke in over in the States.
For sure. And you know, your Pulse films as well, and we're going to get to Repulse as well because it's so exciting, but were they an intentional response to kind of the Taylor Steele films of the time, you know, The Show and Good Times and all that? Was that something when you went out to make those films, you're like, well, we're going to make the Australian version of these because we've got great waves and great surfers too, and we're going to kind of balance them out?
It was kind of like that. I was a big fan of Taylor's films in around 91, 92 when I was young, and moved up to the Gold Coast in 93. And at that time, I was friends with Margo and Neal Purchase Jr. and Craig Holly and Jay Phillips. And so I was just surfing with all those crew around here when I moved up from the far south coast, New South Wales. And I was really into Taylor's films. Everyone was back in that era. That was your kind of pre-surf films. There was no films like that you would amp up to before then. So yeah, I was watching those in the early 90s, but it come around to kind of the mid 90s, and I had all these friends. I really thought that Australia need to be showcased in that same kind of style that Taylor was doing. And and I really wanted to push some new crew through that hadn't been pushed before.
For sure. And, Taylor's films of that time were kind of, surfing had been changing, right? And so the boards were changing and the surfers were changing. That momentum generation was exciting because they were doing fin-free maneuvers and above the lip surfing, and aerials were starting to take root inside of surf films. But the Pulse films, while they had some of that as well, were really kind of true to the philosophy of the holy grail of rail and power surfing, and maybe that is why we were all so excited to get the films too, because it almost showed like two different religions of surfing, like at that bleeding edge, and it was exciting to see that. And was that something that was a conscious decision for you at the time as well?
Yeah, I was always a big advocate of power surfing. Tom Carroll was my favourite surfer growing up. It was just everything was about Tom when I was in my young teens. So myself, I always tried to power surf, and obviously most of our generation weren't too handy at aerials. So when I made the films and I was hanging out with all these guys, I encouraged them to put it on rail more than go for the airs. The airs were starting to happen. Guys like Lee Winkler and Simon Robinson were really good at them. But guys like Margo and Neal, bigger guys, kind of didn't fly as high as the rest of them, and just kind of said, put it on rail. I'm always going to use a rail turn every time. You can kind of blow 20 waves trying to do airs, or we can start ticking some boxes and get your sections together,
I wondered, and I'm curious to get your take on this too, but I wonder if those two, let's call them churches, evolved as products of their environment, my mom's Australian. I've been fortunate enough to spend a lot of time over there, so I have a bit of an objective compare and contrast. But like the waves over there are just so much better. There's just world-class waves all the time that really lend themselves to, if you want to be a power surfer, you just have more opportunity to do it. And in terms of productivity in America, whether you're on the East Coast or the West Coast, sometimes you just have to go film and get results. And I think I wonder if that really led to it's not that exciting, and I can't really do an exciting full rail turn out here like I could, at Bell's or something. So I'm going to have to kind of pop my fins out or do an air to do something exciting. I wonder if that had any kind of play, just the environment had any kind of impact on how these kind of two schools developed.
I definitely think so. And you've got that kind of tall poppy thing over here in Australia. And you kind of got written off a bit when we started doing airs over here, obviously by the older guys. And also we got those kind of wedgie kind of waves over here that have a lot of power, kind of TPs. And that's perfect for putting the rail in when you haven't got a lot of walls. Sometimes you get a lot of speed off the drop, and it gives you a really good chance just to bury the rail. So, you're right. The waves over here certainly, are really good for power surfing.
It's fascinating because it's almost kind of like you look at like two different lines on evolution in terms of how different communities evolved through that time period. And even going over there to this day, and maybe this is a nice segue into the current project with Repulse, but every time I'm over there, I'm just blown away by the collective level of talent of surfing just out in the lineup for like what I guess we call like civilians, people that aren't professional surfers, but they still surf at a very high level. And as they get older, they still surf at a very, very high level, like shockingly so. Which isn't to say that people in America don't, but I think generally speaking, like people tend to atrophy as they get older, they get distracted. Maybe that is a kind of an environmental thing too, where it's like, I just don't have the waves to like get me moving. But to that point, you've just released Repulse. It's incredible. It's available for purchase on Vimeo. I recommend everyone purchase it immediately. But it features 4 generations of Australian surfers. Can you walk us through how you kind of classify those generations in the film?
Oh, well, there's kind of my generation, which I'd put Neal Purchase, Margo. Then there's the older guys like Rocky, and that Rocky's not actually in the new one, but that was the idea, to have an older generation, Tom and Ocky's generation, which I didn't get around to. And then there's the kind of generation of the younger generation, like Micah Margieson, they'd be the youngest generation. Margo's son, Dakota Walters, Caius King. So they're all the young guys. And then there's kind of that generation above them that are in their 30s, which Creed McTaggart, those kind of guys. And then you got your kind of 40s guys, or guys just hitting their 40s like Parko's generation, and just under them, the Dan Ross and Sean Cansdell and all that. So that was my kind of breakdown of the 4 generations. I was kind of going for 5, but I just didn't get there.
Now, how did this project come about? Because going back to my opening story of Vonderjahr, it made such an impact on me. I went and dove into your catalog, but unless I'm wrong, I don't think you put out a film after that for several years. Is that correct?
Yeah, I didn't produce a film for 17 years. This is it was a fair gap. That's for sure.
What was the reason for the hiatus?
I was probably a bit disheartened at first, kind of losing money making films and working hard. The cover mount DVDs in the early noughties, by then it was pretty much wiped out. By the late 90s, sorry. As an independent filmmaker in this country anyway, there was no money to be made in surf films. And I kept popping a few out. Margo's one was quite successful actually, because that was something different. And that went kind of worldwide. But yeah, and I got really sick. I got really, really sick and nearly died. And I spent a year in bed. So that kind of topped everything off and finished my career basically. Yeah.
It's so shocking to me that, as you mentioned, independent filmmakers, the cover mount DVDs, and I'm sure most of our listeners are like, what's a cover and what's a DVD? But, I remember those coming out too. And again, working at the surf shop, and I would travel to Australia and I would get, Waves or ASL or Tracks, and they would have like, oh, you buy the magazine, you get a DVD. And I'm like, how's that possible? What are you talking about? And, whether it's, you can go back to Bruce Brown, or you can talk about Jack McCoy or Taylor Steele yourself. And throughout every generation to this day, independent surf filmmakers have an outsized importance with surf culture.
Yeah.
So it's bananas to me that it's just not, it never seemed like a career path that, as you pointed out, if you were an independent filmmaker, if you weren't on one of the brand's payrolls, it was almost impossible to make a living.
Yeah, I think when I first started out, there was definitely money in it for the first few years. And the great late Chris Bystrom took me under his wing, actually. And one of the first things he taught me is, if I'm going to make films, is to distribute my own films. He goes, as soon as you hand it over to somebody else, you've lost half your pay, and you really need to take control of your film and push your film yourself throughout the world. And he instilled that into me, and that really made a difference to my sales as soon as I started up. And I kind of was making a living out of making films, but all the money went back into the next film anyway, which suited me. I was traveling the world and having a great time. So it was all about the lifestyle more than money back then.
Of course, yeah.
Over time, you kind of just started going backwards a bit more. You were expected to put a bit more money into each film and try to make it better, because when I started out, I didn't know what I was doing. I was a complete amateur. But I was probably making more money when I was learning than later on, funny enough. But, talking to Chris back then, he was making a lot of money, because he had America under wraps and Australia and really good soundtracks, and he had the distribution in both countries. So he was making a good living for sure.
Yeah. So 17-year break. How does Repulse come together? My understanding, and I think I actually experienced this just as a follower of yours, was just I saw so much attention, and I was just so excited to see the content you were releasing from your catalog on Instagram. And it seems like the community really rallied around that too. Did that have a hand in you deciding to make another film?
100%. I wouldn't have made Repulse without doing Pulse Surf for sure. I was kind of influenced by Margo and Neal Purchase Jr. to start an Instagram page. They kind of go, why don't you just release a few waves of, people need to see what the 90s was like. That stuff's just been buried. And they were on about it for a few years, and I just wasn't interested in doing anything to do with surfing at that point. I was working in motorsport at that time. And then I cleaned out the garage one day and started digitizing a few tapes and went, oh wow, and stuff that I hadn't used through Repulse and all the stuff I hadn't seen. I thought, yeah, this is crazy. I better get it out to the world. And it took off really quick. It surprised me that people were really into looking at the narrow boards and how we were surfing, drawing the different lines, all that kind of stuff. And the page really took off.
That's so cool. It does feel like it coincided with, it's almost like that kind of footage and those kind of boards and the ability of the surfers and the way they approached wave riding is almost like this forbidden and sacred knowledge, you know? And I remember, I don't say like Kelly maybe was like posting some old Shane Herring stuff and was talking about it so passionately. And it's one of those things where it's like, okay, well, Kelly Slater is a surfing deity, and that he's focusing all of his attention on what this person's doing in these bowly little waves on this banana shaped board. And you're looking at it and you're trying to process it compared to what you know about surfing today. And it's like, it's so impressive how everyone surfed on those boards, and they were just completely different lines. And I wonder, in your experience, I'm sure the younger generation have an appreciation for it with the kids that you've been working with, but I'd imagine that most people are just kind of getting introduced to it for the first time through this film.
Yeah, I think it really got introduced to it through Repulse Surf.
Yeah,
got an incredible amount of feedback off young people asking about the dimensions and saying how good with the extra nose through the turns and the extra rail line, kind of the longer drawn out turns. But you had to be on top of your game on those boards, being some of them are only 18 or under 18 wide, really wafers, a lot more bend in them. So you had to stick more into the pocket of the wave. And if you weren't on your game on those boards, you certainly had less good days back then, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, for the folks watching this at home, we've got the Andy board behind me, and that's from 2003. But even it's so small, and he wasn't a small guy, you know. And it's his short board. It's a 6'3", and it's probably right around 18, and probably just 2 inches thick. And it's just one of those things where you're like, oh my God, how did he ride this board? And but then you watch the footage, and you watch footage in Repulse, and it's just so amazing to see how everyone surfs. And I think one of the exciting things about Repulse, for me anyway, was getting to watch surfers like, you know, Margo and Simon Nicholson and Sean Cansdale and surfers like that who were maybe in some of the original films riding the equipment that we're talking about, but they've all kind of updated the equipment, but they still have that approach in their heads, but they're just using modern equipment and all the speed that it offers them to do it. It's really amazing.
Yeah, certainly the boards these days allow you to surf. You have better days on them, that's for sure. But yeah, the lines you used to draw, the lines you're still drawing now, and just being older and having that bit of extra width and bit extra area up the nose and all that kind of thing. But yeah, the guys still surf exactly the same, and that's kind of what I wanted to show in Repulse. That, you know, when I finished Vondi, me and Margo thought we were old. We were 30 years old. He went and retired. And I started already getting ideas of making this surf film with different generations in it. That was almost 20 years ago. I wanted to make this film, but I just didn't want to make it for 20 years, unfortunately. You can't force yourself into these things. I really wanted to make it. And, when COVID come around, I went, right, here's a good gap for me. I'm not sure I'm going to be kind of hunkered down for a while. It's a good time to make a surf film. Reconnect with old friends, do some surf trips up and down the East Coast. And, you know, we've all had kids and everything like that. We haven't really seen each other much in the last 15, 20 years. You know, guys like Sean and that, I haven't seen him for ages. So it was a great way to reconnect, but also bring those younger crew in on the same trip so we could all hang out and get to know each other and appreciate each other, each generation.
Absolutely. And how's the response to the film been in your experience over in Australia?
The feedback's been, it's been super positive. I'm stoked with it for sure. Seems like all generations like the film. Hasn't been a big seller. It's very hard to sell a film, and I'm selling like I used to sell a film for a decent price. trying to make money out of it. So it's quite a hard slog trying to sell it yet. I haven't broken into America yet, and hopefully this will help a little bit. But trying to influence people to part their ways with money for a surf film these days is a little tricky.
It is, and I mean, I think you mentioned the cover mount DVDs, and then internet and social media, and people expecting everything for free. Yeah. But ironically enough, it was social media that sort of generated all this interest in you creating Repulse, which is really fun.
That's right.
But also just like you cannot get this kind of content or this kind of story anywhere else. So it's 90 minutes, it's 4 generations of Australians, and tying it all the way back to Vonderjahr and your other films, for anyone that is interested in as I think I mentioned, like wanting to understand what's happening on the bleeding edge of surfing, like this is essentially the tesseract that you have to tap into if you want to know what's happening in Australia. And there's such exciting stuff happening across these generations. So I recommend everyone check it out.
Thanks, mate. That's nice words.
No worries. Well, we're going to take a quick break to get a word in from our sponsor. And when we come back, we're going to dive into how you got your start, Gane. So we'll be right back. All right. So we're coming back with Australian filmmaker Justin Gane. But you were also a professional surfer before you were a filmmaker. But I want to bring it all the way back. Where did you grow up, Gane? Where were you born? What was your family life like? Siblings, mom, dad? What's your story?
Born in Canberra, 1971.
The capital.
I was the capital. I was glad to get out of there. I ended up moving to North. My parents divorced when I was 6 or 7, and moved to North Narrabeen around 1977, I think, and rode a surf mat there. And then a few years later, my mum and stepfather bought oyster leases down in Batemans Bay, which is about 4 or 5 hours south, down on the south coast of a place called Batemans Bay. And that's where I started surfing. Ended up just meeting someone in the schoolyard, and they were incredibly good surfers. They're only 11 and 12. I'd already surfed 7 or 8 years, and they took me under their wing. And Nicholson boys, Jeff and Michael. And we pretty much, as we grew up, started surfing all the reefs and exploring everywhere. And that was my life. Beautiful place to grow up, and surfing big waves and reefs and river mouths. And it's still, even though I've been up this way for nearly 30 years, I still consider that home, because it's where I grew up as a teenager, and just have fond memories of that place.
That's such a formative time. And I'd imagine, I kind of go back to a point from the first segment, was, the waves there are so good, and not to blow up that part of the coastline, but so many setups, so many world-class waves. And I'd imagine in the 60s, 70s, 80s, in that time, you just probably were able to, even though you're a late bloomer compared to some of your peers, get very, very good very, very quickly. Is that a fair assessment?
Definitely not with me, but
it might be a fair assessment. You might not say it. It's true, but yeah.
Coming from the South Coast, there was no one to look at. There was no contests. There was not even, when I started, VHS machines. You might have had them earlier than we did. And I was lucky. My parents, I was starting to get all right. I was about 14 or something, and my parents bought a VHS machine. And I started studying, I think I bought it. Chris Bystrom film, I think it was Blazing Boards. The one where maybe Wave of the Future or something like that. Nike did that big air at D-Bar right off the beginning, and it just... So I studied this film and turned up to a contest the next month and won my first board riders contest. So, and people didn't know where that come from, but felt like I'd cheated by having a VHS machine and a surf movie.
I mean, that's so fascinating to me, because we talk about that phenomenon on this podcast all the time, really, because, it's, I don't even think, I've got 8-year-old twins. I don't think they will ever fathom what life is like without having immediate magical access to content and information. Right. And in some ways, I mean, let's face it, there's a lot of downsides to it. We can spend 8 podcasts talking about those, but in some ways, there is a democratization of surfing because immediately you have access to, okay, what are the boards? What does that surfer do? How do they approach that kind of a wave, et cetera, et cetera. But before the internet, it was who's the best surfer at my local beach that I can physically watch.
Yeah.
And then as you pointed out, well, okay, to augment that, do I have like a VHS player that I can put, a Chris Bystrom film in and study? And you're sticking to the position that it gave you a huge leg up in your first board riders competition.
Surf Video is the original surf coach.
There you go.
100%. Yeah, I remember. And then I remember we got ABC here and it was all fuzzy. It was that classic comp with when Occy had and Current Heat. Tom Carroll was surfing really good in it too. Because I was a big Tommy fan, I recorded it. It was all buzzed out and everything. You could barely see it. And I didn't tell anyone I had that. And I watched that religiously. So I'd won this contest and everyone goes, it's a fluke Gane. He's not a good surfer, whatever. He had a bit of luck, whatever. We rocked up to this reef, a place called, I won't even say where it was actually.
You can just say a word and Hendo will bleep it out in the cut.
It's called...
Don't say it. It's fine. Yeah.
Anyway, so I was on my backhand. It's a reef on my backhand. And backhand surfing wasn't so big back in 1984 or whatever. You'd watch Occy and Carroll were good at it. And anyway, I watched that contest and I was watching Tommy do these big roundhouses and I just broke it down frame by frame, trying to mimic his hands and the way he was squatting. Rocked up to the contest. It was 4 to 6 foot at this reef and just blew everyone away. So then by that point, I was considered an okay surfer in my small little region. That's about it.
But I wonder if the fact that you had one video to study compared to the information and content paralysis that we all have today actually served as more of a meditation for you, right? Where it's like, well, I've only got however much it is, like 32 seconds to review over and over and over. And I'm going to focus every ounce of energy I have into looking at where are his hands, where are his feet, what angles is knee at, like what's the trajectory off the bottom. And it's probably infinitely more effective than someone just flicking through Instagram being like, yeah, I watched 8 seconds of that and then skip that one and whatever. I actually think that there was a golden era to absorb and to get quite a lot out of surf content in that time.
Yeah, the less is more is definitely was handy back then. It's not being overstimulated. It gave you kind of more of a focus, I suppose. But that was the start of me breaking everything down into frames. Even when I shoot video now, I see everything as a bunch of frames. I know that where there's a perfect, where the perfect frame is when I'm shooting it. And it all stems from that first VHS player, just breaking everything down by frame, getting mum's mirror and watching everything backwards so I could understand what natural footers were doing too with their body positioning. Mirrors were handy back then. But yeah, that was the start of it all, I suppose. My fascination and with style and power.
So early 80s, you win the first board riders contest you ever enter. What's going on in your teenage brain if you're a teenager at that point? I'm sorry.
I'd actually been in a lot of quite a few local board riders contests, and the guys that taught me, they were the guys I finally beat. It took me 2 or 3 years. The Nicholson brothers. Yeah. Another guy called Michael Wise who lived in the same street. There was kind of 4 of us, and we were kind of the better surfers in our area in that generation. So yeah, it was a little push there, and yeah, it was nice to get a win and be considered part of their group.
And what about professional aspirations after winning a board riders contest? I mean, Jesus, it's 2022, but even today, professional surfing feels relatively Wild West. Back then, it is almost well, what am I going to do? Am I going to go on tour? Am I going to make videos? Am I going to just work a day job so I can surf or a night job so I can surf as much as I can during the day? Did you have any professional aspirations as a surfer at any point, whether it was immediately after your maiden win there or not?
Definitely not there. At 15, I left home and become a sign writer. I really wanted to get a trade under my belt. I'd always dreamed of being an artist. It was my dream to paint or to sign write. If you know what sign writing is, with the old maul stick.
Yep.
So I was really taught by these classic guys, traditional sign writer doing gold leaf and all the old school stuff they did 100 years ago. So I was taught, did a lot of training in that for about 3 years. So that was kind of my focus. And it wasn't till 91, I think it was the Coke Classic. I drove up there. I'd never seen a pro surfer surf before. And there was the contest Gerlach won. And it's funny, I edited something up for Ger last year. And he goes, "Oh, can you edit this thing up for me for the Coke? I'm doing something in Manly." And I go, "Mate, I was at that contest. That's the first contest I've ever seen. And you're like, my favourite surfer. He was one of my other favourite surfers." And he sends me the footage. And there I am, close-up shot on me and my girlfriend at the time, looking up at Brad on the stage, like raising his trophy up. He goes, "No fucking way, you weren't kidding me. I thought you were kidding me saying you'd been there." So 91, that was the first time I'd seen a pro surfer surf in for real.
I love that. This is going to be the most obscure reference I've maybe ever talked about on the podcast, but who gives a shit? There used to be this show called the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, and it was like a TV show after the Indiana Jones films. I was like a kid, and it was awesome. They had this old guy who was like old Indiana Jones, and he'd like tell all these stories about when he grew up, and he's like in Africa at some point, etc. And there's this episode, I'll never forget it. He's an old guy, eye patch for some reason. He's got a cane. He's in a museum, a history museum, and he's looking at this photo, and he's arguing with the museum guy on the date. And it was about the Bolshevik Revolution. And he kind of goes into this story about why the date's wrong. And it's this whole story about how he was there and he fell in love and blah, blah, blah. And it's a massacre. And he finishes the story by saying, "This is right before the Bolsheviks got massacred. And that little blur in the corner of the photo is me trying to save them." And I was like, that's amazing. I've never forgotten that device from storytelling, but that reminds me of that when you're like, Gur sent me the footage and I'm in the footage. That's incredible.
It was very funny. We had a good laugh about it. That's for sure. Yeah, but around that time, I think after I seen that contest and watching Gur surf, and it fired me up. And I remember I entered, there was a couple of contests called the CHP International, I think it was called. They were up in Wollongong, the contest. And at the time, I was kind of picking up a young guy called Shane Wiener. He used to be in the top 44.
Yep.
And kind of took him under my wing and we started riding big waves together. He was a few years younger than I, so he started riding a couple of my guns and took him to some big wave spots and all that. And I've had some of the most incredible surfs ever with Shane, barrel rides, and just the two of us surfing for years. But anyway, in 91, he was probably 16, 17. I was probably 19, probably 20. Anyway, went to this contest, went all the way through it, couldn't believe it. And me and him were in the final. Went up in the car together. Anyway, he beat me by count back in the final. So it was my first proper big contest. Well, not a QS or anything, but just a big South Coast contest. And he kind of declared at that point, he goes, "I'm going to be a pro surfer. Let's go on the tour." And I kind of looked at him weird, thinking, "You're tripping. Like, we're all right." But I always remember him saying that, and was proud of him because he just chased his dream. I kind of went, "That's not for me. I'm not good enough." I kind of thought, I don't want to be one of those guys. If I did get on tour that wasn't the best, you kind of want to be. He wanted to be a Tom Carroll or Rocky. I never thought I was anything like that. And but he powered ahead and just kept going and ended up making the CT and then made a final with Kelly at Pipeline. So super hats off to Shane. That's for sure. Proud moment.
Well, and that it is, and that's incredible. And I remember that final, reading about it in the magazine too, and how everyone was so proud of Shane because South Coast boy, and he was taking on Kelly. For your own career trajectory, not feeling like you were maybe good enough to make the CT, were you still trying to work with sponsors? Were you doing any sort of like free surfing trips or doing any regional contests, or how did that chapter close for you before you started the next thing you're working on?
Well, this is where life got really weird, actually. It's a big sliding door moment right at that point after that contest. I made a few more finals in some local contests, and was thinking of doing some bigger ones or whatever. And then, I just launched my signwriting business, finished my apprenticeship, and that was opening up on the Monday. On the Saturday, I had a big car accident and lost 4 fingers. Car flipped on its side, hand smashed through the window and on this van and slid down the road. I was with a mate and it just ground my whole hand. My hand was like this big, fingers snapped off, just a complete mess. It was like a surreal dream going. I've just worked in Canberra for 3 years, trying to be the best signwriter in the country, and now it's all over. I'm hanging upside down the car, watching blood out my fingers, just going, wow. Everything changed at that point, but looking at that point, I wouldn't be sitting here today and done anything if it wasn't for that. That was kind of my sliding door moment, or one of them.
Yeah.
And it ended up kind of moving me to the Gold Coast. I remember I came up here. My mum was living up here, and to rehabilitate my hand, I had to go to Brisbane and see people, and I didn't like them, so I ended up reading books and rehabilitated the movement in my hand, which they said I'd never have, and they told me that I could sign right left-handed, and that just annoyed me so much. I'm going, yeah, maybe if I'd had my arm chopped off here, but your brain doesn't work like that.
Right.
And, I got them back, but I could never have been a great signwriter like I was, because you use these 3 fingers to twirl the brush as you come down into your bottom of your letter. And I was a perfectionist, and I didn't want to continue if I wasn't going to be the best at something.
Mm.
It just annoyed me. So, I ended up being up the Gold Coast. And just before that, I was sponsored by Billabong. I got sponsored by them. I think I was one of the first crew to get sponsored by Billabong down the South Coast. And, while I was up there, I had a shape I rode for called Ken Reimers. And I went to Kenny's house to meet him for the first time. And there, sitting in the corner, was a guy called Jamie Costaglis. If you know who Jamie Costaglis is, you'll know what I'm talking about. But at the time, Kelly kind of hit on the scene, and Shane Herring. Jamie Costaglis was one of the other big names. He was really underground. Surfed just like Tom Curran. Classic surfer. And so, we hit it off, and I ended up staying on the Gold Coast for months, just surfing with Jamie. I remember he had a tracks cover with the stray cat up on the nose of his board, and it made a tracks cover, and he gave me this board, and I went back to the South Coast, and it's like all the time I spent in hospital getting my hand reconstructed, all I did was watch surf films, and they said I wouldn't surf for 6 months. And with Jamie, I put a glove on and I went out down to Boulders Beach, and I surfed 10 times better than I'd ever surfed first surf in 6 foot. All I was doing was just visualizing surfing so much.
Yeah.
I was kind of off my head on morphine for about a month. Just watched every surf movie I could get. Mum went and bought me every single one of them. And that kind of changed my life. That got me to move up to the Gold Coast. And then through Jamie, I met Neal Purchase and Margo and everybody else from there.
Hmm. It's amazing that I'm always amazed hearing those kinds of stories of whether it's an injury, often an injury, but the visualization and not actually doing the activity, but visualizing it, leading to huge improvements. You hear about it. I remember reading stories about Vietnam prisoners of war who were locked up for a period of time, and to pass the time they visualized golfing, and when they came back they were like, I knocked like 5 strokes off my golf game, haven't played in 4 years, sort of thing. But you hear it all the time, and it's such an underrated thing, but it's incredible that you came back and you were able to surf even better. So when you came back, are you still riding for Billabong? You're in with this crew. How how does the filmmaking start? Because obviously that's a through line pretty much since you got the VHS player, as you pointed out, like your brain started to work frame to frame. I'm wondering what the transition was between, well, I'm still surfing very well with this crew, but maybe I'm going to start filming.
Yeah, at that point when I started surfing every day with Margo and Neal Purchase, and another guy called Craig Holly was probably the best surfer in the country at the time. He was incredible. I likened him probably to Shane Dorian, kind of that good. He was kind of our Shane Dorian, really good in big waves and good in any waves, and he could do all the aerials, do everything. Anyway, us four would get in the car around 93, 94 and go surfing every day down the coast, just south of the Gold Coast. And after about a year of that, when we were watching Taylor Steele films to psych up at that time as well, we go, Jesus, it'd be good if Australia we could showcase some Australian surfing. And so I just, went and bought a camera, and the four of us would take it in turns, just film for a half hour, and just rotate. And after a few months of that, we'd come back and look at the footage. You're going, oh, we surf pretty good. Like the surfing looks good. And I kind of at that point went, well, I'm the weaker denomination. How about I make the film? There's no way I'm as good as Margo and Neal Purchase. They were like gods to me anyway. But I was just lucky to hang out and surf with them. But yeah, I surfed with them before I started making films, so we were mates. So it just seemed like a great transition for me to make a film with my mates.
Yeah. And do you remember the first film you put out, and what were the responses of that peer group of Neal Purchase Jr. and Margo, and how did it kind of hit? Because it is a big deal, especially in retrospect, where certainly in America, the Momentum generation has kind of been the next best. They're like the biggest next thing for like 30 years going, right? And you were that version over there. You were documenting this type of surfing that was so important at the time. I'm curious as to how that first film came together and what the feelings were like on the ground there.
Yeah, it was definitely just from hanging out with my mates and rocking up the D-Bar. Then there was just so many surfers like Will Lewis and Jay Phillips and Ockie. All those crew were just there. You could go down. There was no filmmakers either. There wasn't really anyone. There was Sarge doing the tour thing back then. There was Jack McCoy doing the high-end, beautiful kind of cinematography. But there's nothing in between. I needed that kind of action film that would get you psyched up for a surf. So I released a film called Unleashed in 1995, and Margo and Neal were the two biggest surfers in that film, and they were the two biggest surfers nearly in the country too. They were, surfers weren't so big back then,
right?
In the 90s, and those boys are like 6'1" and whatever, they were 80, 90 kilos, so it was something different.
Yeah, and we always kind of crack up in hindsight with the discography and the soundtrack to the Taylor Steele videos, and it's like I could probably make an academic argument that Taylor Steele made Blink-182 for better or worse. But did you have your own kind of approach to music in these videos? Because it wasn't I feel like all your films have a distinct soundtrack that's pretty specific to you.
Yeah, I really wanted to go down the rock road, the punk thing. Obviously, Taylor had pushed those punk bands coming through that era, which was great for the bands and great for him. But I really wanted to push the rock acts of Australia back then. Some were already known, but also push completely underground ones. And even at the point where I helped bands record, bands like Rollerball down the track. So I've just really loved the rock music, that kind of 70s sounding rock. Nice, organic kind of rock.
How did you deal with, I'm always curious about this since you're you're very humble, but photos and footage included, like you yourself were and are a world-class surfer. And I'm always curious about the psychology of transitioning to behind the camera, where we're going on a surf trip, but I'm going to be filming other people. Was that ever hard for you? Or were you ever like, ah, God, I wish I was surfing instead of filming right now?
I'd be honest with you, I've never liked standing on the beach filming surfing. I'd rather be surfing. But
Right.
I felt when I started that film, I felt like it was my duty to try to help other people make a career, be able to pull in sponsors, to be able to travel the world. Once I'd started, there was like no turning back. I was at that point where I decided I'm not going to do contests. I actually did a contest. I released Unleashed, and I remember a guy called Dave Davidson. If you remember Davo, and a few of my other friends said, "Why don't you go in a QS, like a big contest?" And I'm going, "I haven't never been in one." And I went in the 4X Pro at Cabarita. I kind of went. I remember I was having a few drinks with Dave, and I go, "Right, we're having a few drinks, getting a bit pissy," and I kind of went, "Okay, I'm going to go in a contest."
I'll just pause and say, I'd imagine there's a fair amount of QS membership that's happened under those exact same circumstances.
Hey, would it be rude to have a beer now?
No, not at all.
Oh, good. Just while we talk, mate. We won't plug them, I don't think, but got it in the new. Got it in. I'll plug the Repulse stubby holder.
That's good. I like that.
Yeah. And, anyway, so I'm getting pissed with Dave, and I'm kind of going, "Yeah, okay, I'm going to go in the contest. But if I go in the contest, I'm making the quarterfinals." And he went, "Oh, I like your positivity." And they were big contests back then. I don't know if it was a QS or an ACC. Might have been an ACC, and it was a 4-star ACC or something. And
Sure.
The first time I'd met Neal Purchase and Occy a couple of years before was at this contest. And the first time I'd seen Margo surf, I'd never even heard of him, was at this contest. Anyway, I've entered the contest and, ended up just kind of going through each round and getting really high scores. It was only 3 foot on my backhand, just kind of putting it up vert. And went through 10 rounds. And because I was a nobody, I was drawing pretty hard surfers. Some of the guys that were already in my first film, I drew most of those and took them out as well. It was kind of fun. And in the end, I got in the final. I'm sitting out there like it was a dream, and then it was just I was giving waves away. It was like it wasn't real that I was there. And afterwards just talking to people, that had been doing contests for years, saying they'd never made the quarters, and I kind of went, "Why are you doing it? It seems it's not that hard. You just got to win heat after heat after heat." But I made that final, and I didn't get the kick out of it I thought I would. I wasn't super psyched, like, "Oh, yeah, I'm going to go in another contest. I'm going to be a pro surfer." I kind of went, "Oh, I'm going to make my next film, Pulse." So, and funny enough, when I was making Pulse, I went in another 4X Pro on the Sunshine Coast, and I remember I was filming and then dropping, had my boardies on and running out for heats. And I remember I made 5 rounds with Trent Munro. That was a QS. And I did 5 rounds with Trent and then got knocked out. I think I got a 25th or something. And it was funny. I couldn't beat that little bastard. He's a hard man to beat.
He is. He remained a hard man to beat, right? On the CT as well. But it is. You kind of hinted at it before too. Like everyone, like it's such an attractive life, to be to surf, in whatever capacity you do it in. That a lot of us, it's a little bit like running away to join the circus, right? Where it's like, well, yeah, I could make a film because then I can go surf, or I can go do a contest or whatever it is. Or, yeah, I could intern at the ASP and maybe I'll go to Hawaii. Like, I think surfers have this sort of unique disposition of, well, yeah, I can do that job and I can join the circus and, shovel elephant shit figuratively. And I'll get to go to Tahiti. Why not? I think there's sort of an opportunistic bend to that. Throughout those films that you released in sort of the 90s, I'm curious because it felt like a lot of the brands were then trying, as you pointed out, you're an independent filmmaker, but a lot of the brands then tried to poach independent filmmakers and kind of bring them in-house, especially as, media became so important. Did you ever have any of those conversations with brands? Did they ever try to come to you and say, like, well, why don't you just come, put the team shirt on and you can be our filmer instead?
I always waited for those days.
Mm.
And I've never had an offer at all from anyone to make anything, really. It's always been on my own, making a bit of a lone wolf, I suppose, with the filmmaking. Yeah, it was different when I went to V8 supercars and motor racing, and you're part of a team
Right.
with that, part of a whole team. And then I went into we're doing rally cars and desert races and stuff like that. But with surfing, I kind of got really, really sick. Like I talked before, and only died from a malpractice from an operation. Appendix operation went foul, and I still struggle with certain elements of that. I had a lot of operations on the gut, and I wasn't meant to survive that, and I pulled through it. Spent about a year in bed. Came out of that, and I started hitting up anyone I knew in the surf industry, just begging for a job. I basically begged for a job, and no one gave me anything. And then I kind of went, you can imagine what I thought about the surf industry. That was kind of the point why I haven't made a film for 17 years. I kind of went, I've always been on my own. I can't expect anyone else to pick up the slack for me. And I wanted to stay positive, and I thought, now's a good time for a new experience. So I got offered a position in motorsport, and I went, unreal, I'm going to take this. I needed money.
It is that double-edged sword, right? Because on the one hand, the surfing community loves independent, progressive, rebel kind of identity in a lot of ways. So the fact that you've never been affiliated as sort of a quote unquote company man, and you have been independent, probably drives so much value and sentiment in those films that you make and in whatever you put out, any media you put out. But as you pointed out, on the other side, it's if you can't make a living, you can't make a living. And the surfing world, in my limited experience compared to yours, is it changes so fast, right? And you can,
totally.
Like trends change, et cetera, but it feels like for all the change that happens, there are some truisms and foundational things that propel throughout the timeline, and I think that that's something that you've captured beautifully in the Repulse kind of project, because the surfing is timeless, even though it's evolved, it's different, but it's like there's hints of that throughout your entire filmography that are there in Repulse, and there's so much to learn through that. Going to the V8 supercars and the rally cars, had you had a lot of experience in that community and culture before that, or was it just a huge departure for you?
Not at all. Obviously, in Australia, everyone kind of October, a long weekend, watches the Bathurst race. It's probably one of the most famous races in the world, especially in that kind of car category. But I got the job because I had no experience. I wasn't a fan of motorsport or the drivers, so it was a very easy transition for me. I had to work very closely with all the drivers, so I wasn't a fan, so I could just talk to them like I was their mate or something, and it seemed to work for me anyway. And I really enjoyed the different atmosphere, meeting different people, and seeing someone come out and have a crash at 250 kilometers an hour, and then lose a race and drive in, and me stick a microphone right in their mouth, and them to act so calm and so professional. It was different than surfing. I know surfing, they're obviously coached into that way a bit, and maybe, I don't know, it just kind of blew me away how different the sport was to surfing. Maybe surfing's kind of morphed into that more professional thing since then, but it just amazed me how cool hand these drivers were.
There is something, it's funny, it sounds like it was really refreshing to just cut ties with something you've been so involved in for so long and do something completely different. And I think I've talked about this on the podcast before, but on a much, much smaller scale, my twins, Troy and Kellen, the boy and a girl, or girl and a boy in that order, but they got into just rock climbing in the last couple of years, which is funny because I've used rock climbing as an example of something like I've never done it, I'll never do it, and I have a point with that, but I can't say that anymore because they got me into it. Yeah. And just to tie a bow on it, but like it's so refreshing to go somewhere where no one knows who you are, you don't know anything about the thing, and it's just a completely new culture where you feel like I can objectively enjoy or dislike this thing, and there's not any of this sort of loaded history for me on, oh, I can't wear that wetsuit because someone at that company is a piece of shit. So, kind of stuff where I'm like, I don't want to know anything about anybody. I just enjoy the thing. And it sounds like it was a similar experience for you when you went into motorsport.
Yeah, definitely. Really, really loved it. Coming from filmmaking, quite a procrastinator, like most artists, just spending months and months editing and that. And I got straight in there and they're going, push it out. We want 10, 15 stories a day. It's like, and I'm kind of doing all this before it was a thing, like putting stuff out to the news and learning how to compress footage. And I was kind of doing all that stuff. I did a couple of pod kind of shows or something around 2005. It was too early almost. I started a little TV show, like minute TV shows you could watch on a mobile phone, but the mobile phones weren't fast enough. A lot of my ideas at that period, just after Vondiar, was I was a bit far ahead of my time, I suppose. Or it was just bad timing. Like anything, you got to have good timing with any project you do. But going into that motorsport, I learnt not to procrastinate. I learnt how to work fast and efficiently, to undershoot things, just get what you need, build stories, and bang them out. And then to bring that back to surfing, I kind of started working for some people doing stuff. I did some work for WSL, doing some of the Women's World Tour for a while. I think I produced about 7 shows from the ground up there. So it was great coming from motorsport. It taught me how to bang those shows out.
Yeah.
But do it in high quality.
Completely.
Quickly.
Yeah.
They had to be done in 2-3 weeks and on air. So, so you had to do everything for those shows. It was fantastic.
When you worked in motorsport, where were you based at that time? Was it coastal? Were you still on the Gold Coast, South Coast?
Yeah, still on just the southern Gold Coast, and but working with them, there's 18 rounds, so you were constantly flying to every capital city. And before each race, I would get flown in there with a couple of drivers to do some pre-interviews. It was pretty cool. You get flown in helicopters, and I don't know, just all the crazy stuff I did in that sport. Flying around Bathurst in the center of Bathurst, no one had done in a Black Hawk with the doors open, harness upside down, and all those cool things I hadn't got to do in surfing. Exhilarating stuff, and I had to go and work in sports that were action sports. True. After coming from surfing. Yeah. But I'd never been in the corporate world before. That was kind of my first taste of the corporate world. Surfing was, when I left, that wasn't that at all. It was pretty rebel.
It's a little bit mind blowing to just the money and the means that motorsports have across the board. Whether it's sort of the media coverage or the drivers, the racers, and even watching something like F1's Drive to Survive on Netflix, and the WSL's working with the same production team, Box to Box, on a show with the WSL. But just getting hints of like how high level and how value oriented motorsports are when it comes to production is insane. And it sounds like it was a similar experience with you.
They cost so much to run those teams that what amazed me with V8 supercars is those guys were racing like that, and then you'd get no prize money. Like coming from surfing where they were making $100,000 or whatever, and I'm going, first race I rocked up, so I go, how much did he win for that? And they go, nothing. Got a trophy. They win like for doing the fastest lap before the pre-race. They get a $500 check or something. I go, that's hardly enough beer for the team. but it costs so much to run those sports. So, it's all about getting from race to race and running the team. It's and there's no prize money. So it all comes down to the teams to secure the sponsorship to do it.
Yeah. Wow.
But I worked on World Rally as well. I worked in the Middle East. So I was over there for a while as well. Doing desert rallies in the Middle East was fun.
Jeez. And how did you? How was this? Did this take up the bulk of that 17-year gap between Vondiar and Repulse? You were just working in motorsport mostly? I
was I said I got sick, and then I kind of got offered this job. I wasn't well the whole time I was working. It took me a few years to even busted an ankle as well on top of that. Took me about 3 years to learn how to walk again. And while I was walking huge Ks around the racetrack, and it also gave me a chance to surf and not worry about filming surfing while I was, I was working about 3 or 4 days a week with motorsport. So I started surfing again. I haven't really surfed that much in my life. It was more watching surfing than surfing. But I always found that I don't need to surf that much because I'm used to not surfing much, but used to visualizing and watching it. So it seems to keep you balanced. As soon as you hit the water, it seems like you surfed yesterday, even if it's been a couple of months. I don't think I've surfed for 8 weeks now. I'm going to surf tomorrow, and it'll be probably 6 to 8 foot. Going to be puffing.
Well, we got a couple more topics, and we've got our listener questions for you, but we're going to take one more break in to get a word from our sponsors, and we'll come right back. So I'm so excited to have you on, Gane. I'm sure that's kind of come through, but you were away from surfing for a while, but you've always had this keen eye for what is good surfing, and it's never been more present for me looking, having been a fan of all your films than it is in your current film now, Repulse on Vimeo. Coming back to surfing and seeing these 4 generations of surf, and specifically the younger generations, who impressed you through making this film? And I know you can say kind of everyone, but name some names. Like, who in particular through the filming process did you look at and say, like, that person probably is going to make a real impact on surfing? Because I think there's a few candidates in your film.
For the new generation, I work really exclusively with Margieson. At Kayak King a lot. He was a really hard worker. Impressed me really with his work ethic. Good all around, incredible surfer from power and kind of tech surfing. Dakota, just that speed twitch. He's got that power twitch kind of surfing that I haven't seen since Taj Burrow. It really reminded me of a young Taj, and I hadn't seen Dakota surf much until 2020. Morgan Siblick absolutely blew my mind. I'd never even heard of him. Rocked up to this place, watched him surf, just annihilate everything. And one of my mates, Jeff Nico, the guy that taught me how to surf, goes, he's from Newcastle. He goes, "Oh, this is Morgs. Oh, this is Gane." And I went to Morgs. I went, "Mate, you remind me of Trent Munro." And he went, "Who?" I went, "Come on, you can't tell me you don't know who Trent is." And I go, "Well, you surf like him. You've got the same kind of build, that just power-based, on-rail, just so aggressive, angry looking, but with a beautiful style." And I said, "How's your backhand?" He goes, "Probably better." And I kind of remind me of Trent, that little bit of cockiness. But I knew with that cockiness that he was probably going to be better on his backhand. And then I seen him in those contests at the Coke and got to see him go left in those contests and went, "Holy shit, his backhand is good." So yeah, Morg's really, I love it. That kind of surfing. It's like as good as it gets for me.
But this is exactly what I was talking about with you being this trans-Pacific herald of Australian surfing. Like, you saw that in Morgan before he actually had his season. You know what I mean? And that was kind of everyone's response where they're like, who's this person? But, and I think that's kind of the point is watching Repulse, you're seeing like these things that you're going, oh my God, like this is the next, this is the next generation of Australian surfing in so many ways. The freaky thing with Micah and to me is just almost how like ounce for ounce, how much he surfs like his dad. And I get it because there's like a DNA thing and there's obviously a huge influence thing, but it's like, good grief, man. Like how does that happen? Like, cause Margo is such a unique surfer in so many ways.
Yeah.
I'm blown away by that.
Well, that proves genetic memory right there because if anything, I think Michael probably tried to pull away from his dad.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Being his dad being a hero, I always looked at, Michael was trying his hardest to be his own person. But you can't help that genetic memory, I suppose. That's all I can say. Just periods of that turn, as I said, you see it. There's just a frame where you can't tell the difference between either of them.
Yeah.
But not the whole way through the turn. There's just glimpses of Margo there. And he's got Margo's backhand too. That incredible Micah's backhand is better than his forehand.
Yeah. Head down by the navel, upside down, bottom turn kind of thing. Yeah. I was going to ask you this before, but I'm glad that we're kind of circled back around to it, because it's a phenomenon in surfing that I'm kind of fascinated with. And in America, all the young talent, more or less, I'll generalize, but more or less, if they show any promise, their families almost to a person move them to San Clemente. And they go and surf at lower trestles. And I get it, because it's a very consistent wave and you can hone your talents, et cetera, et cetera. I think there was a phase, and there probably still is a phase in Australia. It might not be as extreme, but similarly with the Gold Coast. And, you got the High Performance Center in Casuarina. You've got amazing waves on the Gold Coast. You got Duranbah, all those things. But I do think that maybe something's lost in that, which is sort of these like regionally bespoke approaches to wave riding, in a way. I certainly notice it here in California. But you yourself grew up on the South Coast of New South Wales. You mentioned Shane Wiener before. You probably developed your own specific style of wave riding and an approach to riding waves that would not have been the same had you all lived on the Gold Coast. And that's something I really liked about Repulse, because it felt like you had surfers from different spaces up and down the coast represented.
Yeah, I think the country crew that don't live in the cities have some little bit of mongrel about them. I think so. Maybe with their style, it might not be as tidy or anything. Obviously, the Queenslanders, even growing up in the 70s and 80s watching it, have those beautiful drawn out lines, which you can see in Parko and Mick and Rabbit and every single Gold Coast surfer there ever was. But coming from the rest of the East Coast, especially the country towns, you have this real kind of mongrel to your style and your attitude. And, you couldn't be standing out down there either. If you didn't wear anything but a black wetsuit, people want to punch up for it. Gold Coast wouldn't have been like that. They had Larry boardies and people wore pink, and, coming from there, you'd see the surf mags and go, wow, they look pretty Larry up there.
But I do think that, like, and I guess everything happens in cycles, right? Where it's like people say, this is going to happen on tour back in the late '80s, early 2010s, where everyone was saying, well, Dane Reynolds is the truth. So now everyone's going to start, drawing their logos on their boards and dressing a similar way, et cetera, et cetera. But it's one of those things where you don't actually have to do that. You can be your own person, and you can surf your own way, and you can dress your own way, and you can have your own style. And you can still be an elite level surfer. And I feel like we're probably moving into a space where I think surfers are going to develop closer to home and kind of have that, as you pointed out, like country mongrel in them, in a way that isn't bred out through we're going to have kind of this robot factory and everyone's going to surf the same. And it's going to be points of difference between that. Now that you've released Repulse on Vimeo, again, everyone should check this out. Are you going to be paying attention to the surfers you include? Are you going to be watching the contests? Are you kind of back in the surfing space at the moment for yourself?
As far as watching contests, I was never out of it. I was always into watching and staying on what was going on, with the competitive stuff. I always enjoyed watching that wherever I was in the world. Yeah, definitely.
Out of the surfers you mentioned, we talked about how Morg's had an incredible rookie season. We'll see how he goes in 2022. I think Dakota Walters, he won the Aussie Juniors not too long ago. Micah is competing. His dad, who you're obviously very close with, is maybe one of surfing's most famous free surfers, right? Has done contests, has won a contest at NIAS, but notoriously didn't compete very well, self-admittedly. Do you think out of those three, I guess Morg's is on tour, but between Dakota and someone like Micah, do you have any predictions on their futures as competitive surfers?
Really don't know what they think about, if they really want to be in that top echelon or not. I really haven't had that discussion with them. I don't know. It's kind of a strange world we're living in. It's probably not as fantastic to get on aeroplanes and travel as it was, so I'm not quite sure. I know that those guys have some doubts whether they want the hassle of all that, or if you've got companies that are going to allow you to stay home and free surf and ride good waves here. It certainly seems like a good option rather than the kind of hassle that you might go through. So I find it's very hard for their generation to think about how much time they want to put into trying to make that top elite tour.
That makes a ton of sense. And I think, we hear about it a lot, where it's like, well, why aren't there more Hawaiian surfers on tour? Well, it's hard for them to leave, or same with like Indonesia. And same with Australia. And I think you're right. Like during the pandemic, it really shone a pretty big light on the fact that it's like, well, do I need to do this? I'd like to think that the restructuring of the tour, but from a 2-tier system to a 3-tier system, may help with some of that, in the sense of you can stay home and you can film and you can surf good waves and you can compete regionally to see if this is something you want to do on the regional QS. And if you make the top 5 or whatever it is for your region, then you get a spot on the Challenger Series, which is an international tour, but it's better waves and it's not as many events. And then you can see if you want to do the CT. But yeah, it's an interesting time. Absolutely. But yeah, super fortunate that we have you to chronicle a lot of this. I
went to some of those contests, that they had in Australia here. There was one at Cabarita, and first thing I was surprised about when you rocked up is not many surfers were in the contest. Like even that first tier that you go in, like thinking about that first contest I went at Cabarita, there must have been close to 300 competitors in it. And rocked up, I don't know, I think it's like a field of 128 or something now. And I said to Micah, I think the year before, I said, "Oh, why don't you in this 3-star?" He goes, "Oh, I haven't got enough points. You can't go in there." It's kind of, that's different. You could kind of enter as a nobody. Right. Back in our generation and work yourself through from round 1. And yeah, there might be 10 rounds, but yeah, I found those contests were smaller. So there's this whole process they've got to go through, but they've also lost the big junior series we used to have here in Australia, which is a big stepping stone for Taj and Parko, Trent Munro, all their generation. We even had them as well, but not as many contests as they had. So yeah, and then we had the ACC contest. So we probably had 15, 20 big contests with 200 or 300 competitors. Yeah. Every second weekend. We don't have that anymore. The Australian Championship circuit. And I think that kind of gave us more surfers to look at. Because a lot of, I don't know, people from poorer backgrounds or whatever, it's like that with all sports. You might not get to see someone surf. You might not be getting the best through sometimes. I totally agree. And I think your note on the ACC is a really appropriate one, because I do think that in the next 2 to 3 years, that's the intent with the regional QS system is to have as many events as possible with the lowest barrier to entry as possible to get people opportunity. I think that's the best way to go about it. Whether the surfers end up wanting to compete or not, as you pointed out, it's like, well, the democratization of surfing and giving people a shot, like you just have to have those opportunities for everybody. Yeah, 100%, 100%. This country needs it. I think a lot of other countries need it for sure. And yeah, absolutely. And that's actually fed into the design of that, which is my day job, in that you can look throughout history. Anytime there's been a very strong regional domestic series, even if it's an amateur series, it produces a number of great surfers. The Brazilian Storm were a product of a very, very strong regional competition series. The Momentum generation spawned out of the Bud Tour. So I do think that that's in the future for a lot of regional surfers, and I hope we do see a lot of the young surfers profiled in Repulse competing. I think it'll be great. There's plenty more coming through, and even making Repulse, and all my films, it's like you feel like you can't get to enough people and help them. Even that movie was 2 hours and 20 minutes when I edited it, and I go, how am I going to get this thing down? But there's so many people. I had planned another 50 different people. I had names on a sheet like Brian Callan, I just can't believe he's not in it. And Ockie, it was the first movie Ockie hasn't been in. I wanted Ockie and his son Jay. It's had all, and Lee Winkler and his son. The movie didn't quite pull off like I first imagined it. It was going to be a lot of, fathers and sons surfing together, and it didn't quite work out with that. And then more people joined on, and you meet people, you'd hang out with Micah, and then you meet his friends, and then they're part of the film. So it has got a very bunch of young underground guys, which Pulse had as well. Guys like Tommy Calvaro, and there's a stacks of them in there. Just underground guys. And then there's, you said the guy, I don't know, what's your favourite segment in the film?
Oh, geez, that's a good question. But I'm also of a certain generation, so like, I'm like,
you can go on oldie.
Yeah. No question, I will. I mean, I guess it's one of those surreal things about having worked at the ASP and WSL for 16 years now. Is you talked about meeting Margo. Like I remember I met Margo in Tahiti, and he was just working on the Billabong crew, and I was like, I probably just followed him around with my jaw on the ground the whole time, and he was like getting people lunches and stuff, and I'm like, oh my god, like I'm in a van with Margo. This is unbelievable. So I mean, I love all that. I do think Sean Cansdell is still to this day. I don't surf that well, but I have been in the water with the world's best surfers a lot. And Cansdell to me is still one of the most impressive surfers I've ever seen live in my life. And I loved his segment. Like he still surfs so well. But the individuals you mentioned too, like Thomas Carvalho and Micah Margieson, even Caius's brother Rasmus really impressed me. I think
ripping.
The point that I think happens with your film, specifically with Repulse, is if you want to be tapped into what's happening, as we pointed out, on the bleeding edge of surfing and understand who these underground surfers are before they pop, like you watch these films, it just is what it is. And you learn so much. It really was radical. And it sounds like you've got plenty of stuff in the hopper if you want to put out more content or come out with another film.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope I can do another one. It's funny you said about Sean. It blew me away when I brought out the film that everyone was into Sean, just straight out. All the feedback was Sean. And I was just stoked for him. It's like Sean hadn't been surfing much. He had put on a few kegs, and I called him up and said, come filming. He goes, I haven't been surfing much. And it was just sounded a little bit down. And I said, mate, come, Margs is here, and Jay Phillips. And he goes, I haven't got a board. He goes, I just shaped one for mate up Ballina. I'll be down in a few hours. And he drove from Coffs Harbour up the Ballina and then back to this spot. Basically backtracked with a board he'd never ridden. And then he had like some little quad there, which he does those big turns on, a little 5.6 or something. It's ridiculous. The waves are big and wedgy.
Yeah.
I shot all that in a few hours, 2 days, a couple of sessions. That whole segment's been shot. Just shows you, Sean's one of the most naturally gifted surfers I've ever seen, for sure.
He's unbelievable.
Such balance.
And I always use him as the comp on tour when someone ends up falling off tour, but like ends up losing all their heats with like 16, 17 points out of 20. I was there for the Sean Cansdell season, and it happened on the CT, and it happened on the QS when he was trying to requalify too, where it was every heat in the round would be 12, 13 points. He would get 18 points, and then for some reason, the other guys in the heat would get 19 points out of nowhere, and it was just time and time again. And I could not fathom how such a good surfer, like he should have been a title contender for a decade, and he's so good. He's unbelievable.
I've known him since he was 14 or something like that. But around 2000, when he was about 16, which he showed a bit of that footage in Repulse, I thought he was going to be our answer to Kelly Slater. I thought he was the first guy that had that natural balance from back to front foot.
Yep.
Like he could recover from anything. And I thought he was going to be our guy. But it's kind of refreshing now to see a couple of good goofies in Connor O'Leary and Ryan Callan, and even Ryan surfs so much like Sean, I reckon.
Oh yeah, Ryan's
And
incredible. They're
they
both
kinda
incredible.
both do.
Ryan and Connor, yeah.
And one of the most amazing things, I was filming on this breakwall, this left-hander, and filming with all the boys on this trip with Cairns and that. And Cairns is just paddling out, and Connor runs up the wall by himself. He's driven down, but didn't know he was coming. He's going, "Is that Sean Cansdell?" I go, "Yeah, it's Sean Cansdell." He goes, "He's my hero," and he's like trying to put this steamer on as quick as he could to just launch himself off the wall next to Sean so he could talk to him on the way out. And then Connor just went out, and it's probably the fastest I've ever seen anyone surf. Sean didn't even get a look in.
Yeah.
He was just obliterating these 4-foot wedgie lefts. He rode about 10 waves in about 45 minutes, and every wave he rode, he just obliterated. So but it's good to see he's such a big human too.
Yeah. And it's funny because you said that before too, and the size of everyone on tour is so much bigger today comparatively. Like I remember going back to my opening story of working in the Rip Curl shop, we used to get everyone's quiver for the trestle CT would get dropped off at the shop because it was right next to trestles, and all the guys would come in and we get, here's 12 boards from James Cheel for Bruce, and they'd all come in. Everyone get their boards. Here's another for, Hedgie. And I remember being shocked the first time I met Andy Irons. I was at the shop and he was picking up boards. He was picking up like a traction pad or something. And I was like, will always be a huge Andy Irons fan. And I remember this guy started talking to me, and we're like, 2 feet apart. And it took me like a few seconds to realize it was him because he was so much taller than everyone else that was coming into the shop. And he was, 6 foot, 175 pounds, like not a giant.
Hey.
But compared to every other surfer back in, the early aughts, like he was humongous.
He was the start of the big surfers.
Totally. But they're all so many of them now are good sized, when you think about it.
It's amazing how much Andy and Margo remind me of each other, actually. And a lot of people point that out on Pole Surf.
Yeah.
But Andy, I hung out with him a few times, and he just idolized Margo, so it's no surprise there.
Yeah, that does.
A lot of people go, "Oh, Margo surfs like Andy Irons." I'm going, "No, Andy Irons surfs like Margo. He just took it to the next level, I suppose."
Yeah. Well, it's incredible, and I hope you put out a billion more films, man. I can't get enough of them. We put out a feeler for Instagram questions, and we got a ton, but we whittled them down to 3. So first question from the Instagram community is from @lol_a_07, who asks, what is the favorite film you worked on?
Oh, okay. Geez, Repulse was pretty good, making a return after all that. It was really good to hang out with my mates again and the new generation, drink a few beers, have a laugh. Be up there, but I have to say, making Wandajar was the best for me. Just hanging out with Margo and just picking places he hadn't been, and it was always just me and him traveling. And sometimes we'd tack on an extra person or wherever we were, find someone from that area. But to me, that was the best. Hanging out with my best mate. I'm driving my combi van, had a kitchen in it, and we went down there a couple of times and had pumping bells and went to Mexico, went to California, Hawaii. That was the best, and it was spread over about 18 months, 2 years. I think we didn't rush that film, so it was just epic. Just to make a film on one person and not have to feel like I'm spread thin. Like I said with Repulse, I kind of feel like I can't get to everybody, and you feel like, oh, why aren't I in Gainey's movie? Well, he doesn't. How do I get in there or whatever? But far out. I had 70 surfers in that film, but I still feel like I didn't do justice to Australian surfing. That's just the tip of the eye. That's just the people I'm connected with, and a little few people that are connected with those people I'm connected with.
Yeah.
So it's only really 5% of what Aussie surfing really is.
A lot more to do.
Yeah, so I would like to do another one.
The second question is from @IamMatson, who asks, if you could pick one session that you filmed that stands out above all the others, what was it?
There's 2, but I'll give you the top one. Top one would have to be Margo at Winky Pop, 6 to 8 foot Winky Pop. If you know what I'm talking about. That's some of the best surfing ever done. I remember I put it up when I released Pulse Surf. It was one of the first things I did, and John had done those big turns at Margaret's. Got a visitor.
I do.
Hello.
It's my daughter, Troy. You want to say hi?
Hi.
Okay.
How are you?
Must be. You can hear Ganey? Okay.
Hello.
Yeah, she says she's good.
When's
All right.
bedtime?
It was hours ago.
Yeah, I remember John did those big turns at Margaret River on those rights. And everyone it blew up on the internet going best surfing ever. And I just went, wait on. I got stuff that's like this that shot 17, 18 years ago. And I put that up and I kind of put a question mark, is this good surfing or whatever? And that's what blew up. That was the first post that blew up Pulse Surf. So I'd say that session, it was 2 days of Margo down there destroying 6 to 8 foot winky pop would be my answer.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right. Like that made such an impact in the surfing world. When you reposted it, I think I took it and reposted it. I would have tagged you for sure because that's my approach. But I think my posting of it basically said that this would have been taken 20 years ago, and this is still elite level surfing. And whenever I posted 2000,
that'll always be elite level surfing.
It's unbelievable.
Doesn't matter how far surfing goes.
Unbelievable.
That'll always be there. But there was another session, Christmas Day with Margo, 10 to 12 foot Haleiwa, him riding a 7.6. It's probably even better surfing, but people don't know it. It's in Pulse 2, 1997.
Yeah.
Christmas Day. I think Kelly came out with him for a bit. It was big. He was out by himself, and he was wielding this 7.6. There's no one that turns big boards. Maybe Tom Carroll at Sunset, that stuff. There's a few guys that ride those 7 to 8 foot boards, but Tom Carroll comes to mind. But Margo is absolutely destroying, like doing stuff you're doing 3 to 4 foot beachies in 12 foot Haleiwa. Even does an air on one grab rail, double grab rail on a 7.6.
Unbelievable. So, I think that might also have featured in Vonderjahr a little bit as well, or if it wasn't, I think you guys referenced it. I remember the session.
Yeah, it's definitely in Vonderjahr.
Yeah,
I like how you're the only person that knows how to pronounce it. Even I started pronouncing it the other way because I got sick of trying to explain
because everyone's like, wait, I can't find the film you're talking about. Well, it's German. Just relax. Yeah. The third question is from Badger Bombs, who asks, who would have been the best fit for the championship tour in 1996? Simon Robbo, Jay Phillips, or Will Lewis?
Oh, geez. I think Will, maybe. That's a really hard question. Those three are as good as each other. I think all three of them should have been on tour. Real shame. But Will was so polished. He was kind of like polished like Kelly. And I think Will come close 3 or 4 times, maybe within a place or two. I don't know. But it was pretty disheartening seeing him not make it. There were so many other surfers with half his caliber that kind of just, I don't know, had the will to do it. I don't know what, or Will was unlucky. But all three of those surfers are amazing. They should have all been there.
Totally. Well, we thank the Instagram community for those questions. We're now down to the final segment. It's time for the lightning round presented by Michelob Ultra Pure Gold. These are 10 questions for you to answer as quickly as you can. First question. If you could only have one board setup for the rest of your life, single fin, twin fin, thruster, quad bonzer, or finless, which would you choose?
Probably a 2+1. It's been my go-to board for about 17 years, which is a cross between single fin and a thruster. That's a big back fin. I like a stiff board.
I like it.
Really push it hard. Bottom turns. It's all in the bottom turn.
Coffee or tea?
Tea, definitely.
Burrito or pizza?
Burrito.
Last book you read?
Been a long time. I couldn't tell you, actually. Not much of a book reader lately. Sorry.
That's fine. That answer happens a lot on this podcast. Best surf film ever?
Oh, man. That's a really hard one. I don't know. It's always with whatever mood I'm in. I don't think I could even answer that. It's not one of mine, that's for sure. I don't know. Oh, geez. Probably surf in the summer. I'll say surf in the summer.
I like it. One wave you never have to go back to.
Jeez. So I usually like to return. I can't think of that question. Couldn't. I'd like to return to everywhere I've been.
That's good. That's a good answer for it. Yeah. But if you only got to surf one wave for the rest of your life, which would it be?
I couldn't answer it because I'd be giving the place away.
That's all right. We'll just put a bleep in for you. No worries. You have one. That's the important thing.
Yeah, definitely.
Best person to share a lineup with?
Oh, my mates. All my mates. I got lots of good mates.
Worst person to share a lineup with?
Ooh. Anyone that's hassling. I don't like to surf with people much.
Last one. Finish this sentence. I will next achieve a state of happiness by
moving to my property a couple of days ago. Serene. Loving it.
Very happy for you, Gane. Gane, thank you so much for coming on the lineup. Everyone, go out and
My
check
pleasure.
Repulse now on Vimeo. It's absolutely worth your time and money. It's fantastic. And
Bit of
also
glare
make
there.
sure you follow Pulse Surf on Instagram for all your necessary content. But man, it was a real pleasure talking to you. I really appreciate it. I hope we get to link up for a beer and a surf when I'm over in Australia.
I can't wait for that, Dave. Thanks for your time today. Loved it. Good chat, mate.
Good chat. Appreciate it, Gane.
Love you, buddy.